7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Howdy, Croc Nation. Dr. Tommy and Ellie here with you with another amazing Croc podcast. And it couldn't be more amazing because next to me on the other side of the computer glass is my friend Angel Santana, co-host of my podcast and the host of probably the best podcast on earth, the Have Faith, Let It Begin podcast. Angel, how are you, my friend?
That is possibly true, but don't forget, it is not possible without my co-host on Mondays, Dr. Tommy and Ellie. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Are we still setting records over there on our Mondays?
Listen, the E show and A show, the A and E show is viral, my friend.
Yeah, man. We did what, 1.2 million people last week, right?
and climbing.
God bless America.
That's
wow.
it.
Well, you know what? One day, well, actually, I want no one to listen to the Croc podcast because I don't want anyone to have cancer. So that's my goal, is to never have to advocate for a cancer survivor. And then I'll join Angel a full time as his who was Johnny what was his name? Johnny Carson's sidekick, Ed McMahon. I will be your Ed McMahon, Angel.
Oh yeah, but we will not be sending any magazines to anybody's homes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have continuing with the theme. You know what I like to think, Angel, with the Croc podcast for our cancer survivor thrivers? I want them to feel that we are sort of giving them a peek behind the curtain. So I always think, when we talk about some of the things, the failures in the medical system, or some of the things they deserve in their survivor journey, and, some of the, benchmarks that they should be looking for, and never be made waiting, and never, not be able to be in touch with your doctor, all the things that we advocate for. I really hope that they feel that way. And today is sort of pushing that agenda, is sort of a peek behind the curtain.
Love that.
Today,
Nothing better than peeking behind the curtain.
Exactly. I feel like Monty Hall, and we're going to do a little peek behind curtain number one. So today's podcast, we're going to be talking about a very, very dear subject to me, and that's trying to find a doctor for a cancer survivor. So cancer survivors, you get your diagnosis. Maybe your urologist does a biopsy, or the radiologist does a biopsy on your breast, or the GI doctor does an endoscopy, and then comes the dreaded call or the dreaded meeting when they tell you you have cancer. And then really at that point where your needs are at the highest, where your anxiety is at the highest, where your absolute torture and torment are at the highest, that's when you're the most vulnerable. And that's when you fall into this terrible void, the void of trying to find a doctor. So today we're going to take economic principles that go back to over 2,000 years, and we're going to talk about how it is applicable to the cancer survivor thriver.
I like it. Listen, it's like going back in time. We've done this before, so let's do it.
So, Angel, you know that I'm a jersey collector, to say the least. Absolutely. You know that my basement could be a museum.
It is. You just don't want to admit it.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, when I'm doing this podcast, I am sitting right in the bosom of my several hundred jersey collection. But say I wanted to collect another jersey, and I go to the MLB, and we go to our favorite team, the New York Metropolitans, and I want to get a Pete Alonso jersey. Now, Pete Alonso, for those not in the know, is called the Polar Bear. He's a home run machine. He's one of the best young players on our team, and maybe in Major League Baseball. I would risk to say a star in the Major League Baseball. And I try to find his jersey, and guess what? Can't find his jersey in my size, just not there.
Really?
And I go to eBay, and I find somebody who has a 2X jersey with Pete Alonso. And on the MLB, had they had it, just say it would cost $120. When you go to eBay, it's $430 because there's not enough of them. But say I want to get a Jacob deGrom Mets jersey, They have them for $39.22 because Jacob deGrom is no longer a Met. He's a turncoat trader who took his lame arm to the Texas Rangers, and who the hell wants to wear his jersey anyway? So that jersey is plentiful, and it's $39. So we have that as an example of the supply and demand. So if there's a huge supply of product and there's no demand, then the prices will tank, like in the deGrom jersey. If there's not a lot of inventory, but a lot of demand, then the prices will skyrocket. So the concept of supply and demand, an economic concept, which goes back, as I said, 2,000 years, back to the Indians, to the Assyrians. I think modern, and when I say modern, I go back to like the 1600s. John Locke, was first published, talking about supply and demand, and then also James Stewart, not James Stuart Mills, but James Stewart. And then the person we all know and love, British, American via Britain, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. Everybody has to read it at some point, if they go to college and whatever, you have to read The Wealth of Nations. And he comes up with the concept of supply and demand. So the concept of supply and demand, and I think Adam Smith says it beautifully, and it was published in 1776. Supply and demand is the invisible hand that naturally guides the economy. So what he's saying is that if you were to look at a graph and you would have two lines, one going up to the right and one coming down from the left, it would look like an X. What Adam Smith was saying is right at the intersection of the X, the supply and the demand are perfect for each other. So the purchaser gets a fair price. The seller gets a fair price. Everybody's happy. If you want a Alonso jersey, the demand is way up here to the right and the supply is way over down to the left. So unfortunately, the seller is happy, but the buyer is not. If you're buying the deGrom jersey, the supply is high, the demand is low. So the seller is not happy, but the buyer, whoever wants to buy that turncoats jersey, would be very happy. So that's sort of the theory of supply and demand, kind of dumbed down for someone like me who knows nothing about business. But today's podcast, we're going to do, you ever hear of the dare to be great moment? We're going to do the dare to be taboo moment. We're going to actually marry what two concepts that should never be put together.
Okay.
Healthcare and money. So healthcare is pure and money is dirty. But we're going to put them together because there is some health economics, but not economics in the way of money, but economics in the way of a commodity. And I'll explain that, because your doctor is a commodity. Sadly, that commodity is in great demand. And sadly, the supply is extraordinarily low. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do that today. Your thoughts, Angel?
I think it's interesting about the way that you structured it, and I'm very curious how you're going to utilize that as our message for today. So great segue, great introduction, and very thorough. I was able to follow along very well.
Yeah. So, man, I hope you follow every week, because God help me if I'm not clear, you better let me know, or I'll tackle you.
Well, when you hear anything with numbers, usually you start losing people, and I think that. I love numbers, but I think that, just my input on it, and letting you know that I was able to follow along very well. I think it makes people feel more comfortable and are very curious as to where you're going to take that.
Got it. So it actually starts with a story. So one of the things that, it really doesn't pertain to me, and it's really for an unfair reason. Doctors tend to take care of, take care of our own. So, when my oldest daughter was about 2 weeks old, she ended up with a urinary tract infection because she had a genetic malformation of the way the ureter was implanting into the bladder. So she was refluxing, and, she spiked a fever, probably one of the worst nights of my life in the emergency room, and then got admitted to the hospital. She's 2 weeks old. As much as I'm a doctor, I know nothing about pediatrics, and scared as scared can be, and they get her her situation under control, and she needs to see a pediatric urologist. So of course, the pediatrician calls a friend. We put it's no later than we put the kid in the car, in her car seat. We're on our way from the hospital to the doctor's office. So literally, we're discharged from the hospital and we have an appointment with a pediatric urologist that you usually couldn't see, for 3 months, right? But here I am, with my kid, in this office. So really, why do I even care about the supply of demand of doctors when I have complete access to anybody I want to see anytime? It's because our survivors don't. And that's the reason why it's really important to me. And I can't tell you how many times in a day, not in a week, in a month, in a year, on a daily basis, multiple times per day, I'll see a patient. They'll have to see a bunch of different practitioners, to participate in their care, because cancer care is multidisciplinary. And I can't tell you how many. I feel like I'm almost like a Hollywood agent trying to do deals and broker appointments or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, these poor people, if I wasn't here, or my nurse practitioners weren't here, or my nurses weren't here, or my front desk wasn't here, and they're like banging down these doors to get our patients to be seen. But if they didn't have that, literally, they wouldn't see anybody for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks.
Absolutely.
I relate to that because of Noah, when he had his abnormality on his, suture line and on his skull. You had to get the runaround.
Absolutely. And for the record, just to chime in, I'm trying to get my daughter a pediatric neurology visit, and I have a 6-month waiting list.
Exactly. That's my point. Exactly. Thank you, Angel.
Yes.
That's supply and demand.
And I'm on 5 different doctors' appointment cancellation lists. So whoever calls me first is where I'm going.
There you go. So let's put it in perspective. I want to put it in perspective. So again, I'm using these words very carefully, and it sounds like I'm being very glib with these words, but I'm not. Literally, our survivors / thrivers are being held hostage by this lack of supply and tremendous demand for doctors. So I'm going to go to the American Association of Medical Colleges, the AAMC, just to give you some numbers, just to give you an idea. So there's a projection that physician demands will grow faster than supply, leading to a projected total physician shortage of between 40,000 and 124,000 physicians by 2034. So this is a number of primary care shortages will be between 18,000 and 48,000. Non-primary care specialties between 21,000 and 77,000. So we are trending in a very bad way, where this phenomenon is going to not get better. It's going to get worse unless you listen to the CROC podcast and we make some noise. And that's what we want to do. That's what Angel and I always want to do, is we want to make some noise. So why is this such a problem? Like, why are our cancer patients, our cancer survivors / thrivers, why is this such a big deal? And it's because of what we say every week. When I do my pep talk, someone has to give a pep talk to these courageous survivors, because cancer is different. Cancer is scary. Cancer is intimidating. Cancer is very dangerous. Cancer is very serious. So there is an obvious immediacy for cancer survivors to start their treatments as soon as they get their diagnosis. So this waiting 3 months, 6 months, no good. Even a low-risk prostate cancer patient that might opt for active surveillance at least should be seen in a timely manner to at least make that decision with the urologist or with the oncologist or with the radiation oncologist. The immediacy for cancer survivors is both medical, because you're afraid that you're going to miss the spread of the disease, right? The disease can metastasize. It's emotional, the fear and terror that is wrought by this diagnosis. It's spiritual. It's a test of our survivors' faith. It's personal. It affects all of their relationships. It's professional. It affects their work, and it's financial. It affects their fiscal status. So this immediacy for cancer is, I think, bar none, the most important. Your thoughts, Angel?
It's interesting how the breakdown of the communication between the patient and the client and the I don't want to say client, the caregiver. You want to, because listen, this is the issue I have. I'm kind of torn here. It's not the caregiver's fault in one aspect, right? There's a breakdown in between, don't you think?
Well,
I mean,
we're gonna get to all. Yes, that's a really good point. You're thinking ahead. I'm gonna
okay.
go through all the steps. You know the way
Okay.
I do things.
All right.
You
Go
know
ahead.
the way I do business.
I'll finish my thought then later. Go ahead.
Okay. So there's an implicit understanding, like an implied understanding, that for a cancer survivor, you don't only need a doctor. So it's not even that easy, like just finding a doctor. You really need a team. You need to find a team that's going to be kind, empathetic, aggressive, proactive, and accessible. And that's the stuff we talk about week in and week out, Angel. This podcast hits those points. Every podcast we do always talks about that, what our survivors are worthy of. And great docs that provide these services that check off every box, they are not numerous, especially in underserved areas, right? So the demand clearly far exceeds the supply. So we are off that sort of X part of the graph, and we're all the way on the top right part of the graph. So doctor service, though, is not a commodity. So in business school, not that I've ever been to business school, but when they're talking about like production and retail or whatever, and supply and demand, they talk about commodities, and they use a word widget, or they'll say, okay, you have a widget and you have this thing, this is what you're trying to sell. You're trying to sell this widget. Doctors are not widgets. We are human beings, and we can't be made more available by increasing production of ourselves. We can't clone ourselves. There's also part of that projection I mentioned, is directly related to the COVID pandemic. I think a lot of people that might have been interested in medicine, got a whiff of that COVID pandemic for 2 years, and they saw all the healthcare workers dying. And I think that we'll probably lose, a lot of worthy people, to medical field. But we can increase the number of practitioners, but we can't increase ourselves. So we're not a widget. We're individuals, right? And there's only a limited number of appointments in a day. There's only a limited amount of hours in a day that we could see patients. So there's a bunch of challenges. And you know what I'm going to do, Angel? I'm going to do a challenge, and then at the end, we're going to do a solution. So
Nice.
to your point, Angel, challenge number one is location. If you have cancer and you live in Manhattan, probably you're going to be able to have an easier time finding a great cancer team. Now, maybe not. I've had a lot of people have to wait a long time to get into Memorial Sloan Kettering. You know that I'm Memorial Sloan Kettering. I simultaneously love and hate Memorial Sloan Kettering, for so many reasons, but accessibility is one of them. But if you live in Manhattan, you have a higher chance of getting in to see a doctor than if you live in Liberty, New York. Or even to take it more specifically to my field, there's probably, there's dozens of accelerators in Manhattan, and there's no accelerators in Liberty. You have to drive all the way to Middletown to get treated, or if you're in Monticello or something like that. So challenge number one is location. Challenge number two is quality. So in any given community, there's 1 to 2 stellar practitioners, 3 to 4 great practitioners, a couple of adequate practitioners, and thankfully, very few barely adequate. And thankfully, I don't really see, terrible, bad physicians, because they don't last. They get kicked out, or they, or whatever. But, there are sort of, if you were to look at a bell graph, you'd see the stellar, you would see the great, You would see the good, you would see the adequate, and you would see the not so adequate, with most people being in the middle, somewhere in between. There's also the law of convenience, right? So as a referring physician in the Hudson Valley, I happen to be very lucky, very lucky. I have a connection at Memorial. I have a connection at Montefiore. I have a connection at Beth Israel. I have a connection at Mount Sinai. I have a connection at NYU. I have a connection everywhere. So a patient came to me the other day with breast cancer, wanted to go to Memorial. I called my friend Boris up. I said, Boris, you have to see this lady like tomorrow. And he goes, well, I don't do breast cancer, but I'll give him to, I'll send her over to Dr. Bronstein, who's a world expert in breast cancer. Dr. Bronstein saw her the next day. So amazing story. I'm a very lucky guy, because of where I practice, and over 30 years of practice, I have a network of people that I've developed relationships with. However, in the real world, we tend to go, what do they say, Angel? You tend to follow the path of least resistance, right? So we tend to refer to the most convenient colleagues, the colleagues that we know, we're friends with, we play basketball with, or that we socialize with, and who literally will take our phone call, right? Who actually will get on the freaking phone when we call them, right? That's who we refer to. It really is not a quality thing. It's like, and again, people are probably stunned. Their jaws are probably agape, thinking, oh my God, I really didn't know things were that bad behind the curtain, but they are. I mean, sometimes you're going to be sent to somebody not for any other reason than like that's the only person who will see you. There's also the law of discrimination. And I don't mean discrimination in the way of, skin color, gender, sexual orientation, anything like that. I mean, even some of the primary care doctors, most of the primary care doctors have no idea what I do. So when I talk to them on the phone and I do my, my radiation oncology, language, it's like if I were them, and if I was trained in the way they were trained, I would think, wow, this Iannelli, he's a freaking superstar, right? He knows everything. But, of course, that's not the case. And I think a lot of times the primary cares don't even know who the good practitioners are. Surgeons don't get that lucky, because all you have to do is ask a scrub nurse, what surgeon to go to, and she'll tell you, because she knows the guys that shouldn't have a license to hold a butter knife, and they know the ones that, are skilled, excellent surgeons. But anyway, even oncologists, I know, like, the ENT doctors will refer to me, and other people will refer to me, and I'm thinking, how do they know? Like, they're referring to me from the city. How do they know I'm any damn good? I mean, I'm really fun to talk to. I make them laugh. I'm accommodating, but how do they know that I have a quality, practice? How would they know that? Well, over the years, obviously when you share patients dozens and dozens and dozens of time, you create your reputation. But if a person doesn't know you, they wouldn't know you from a hole in the wall. So that's called the law of discrimination. Angel, challenge 3, doctors are human, especially in the jobs we have. It's not a low stress job. It is a mega high stress job, requiring time off, vacations, social lives, families, children, holidays, continued medical education to stay sharp and, abreast of the newest and latest, greatest stuff. All of us are high functioning, highly motivated, individuals with, decades of education. So we have really cool hobbies, mountain climbing, or, scuba diving, or, flying planes, or whatever. We tend to be way out there when it comes to hobbies. We also have administrative work, research to do, and God forbid anything ever happens to us and we get ill, we have to take that into account. So you put all those things together, right? We have the 3 challenges. You have the challenge of location, if you're in a overserved or underserved location, the quality of the practitioners in your area, with the law of convenience and the law of discrimination. And we have the human aspect of physicians trying to make them into a commodity, which we're not. We're human, and we're flesh and blood, and we have our own challenges. So, Angel, every week, right, when we come up with these problems, we always come up with a solution. So the solution is simply this: we need to think outside of the box. We have to take this top-heavy model, which is what supply and demand is. It's a top-heavy model where there's a lot of people who want, this and blah, blah, blah. And and not enough practitioners to do it. So that's the story. And one last thing for solution is that I've had 3 administrators, managers in my career so far, and each of them had their positive points, each of them had their negative points. But all of them, none of them had a clinic. Actually, 2 of them had a clinical background, one didn't. But even the ones that had a clinical background, they all didn't get it as far as they looked at medicine and the running of the practice as a template. They viewed it as how to, how to business size. That's not a word, but we make them up, an oncology practice. And an oncology practice can't be businessized. You can't have a template where you can only see one patient at 7 and one patient at 7:15. And, and then, I can't tell you how many times we had efficiency experts come into the department to kind of follow me around and see how I could do things better or do things, be more efficient. And again, medicine is not efficiency. I mean, we don't want anybody waiting. I'm totally in agreement with that. But like spend your money on something else. Buy me a new accelerator. Like, don't spend your money like with an efficiency expert or a consultant following me around. And don't give me a template, for God's sake. They've all failed. When you're working, you're working. It's like you're a resident. If you became a doctor, and I'm saying this to the younger doctors, if you became a doctor thinking you were going to punch a clock, if you became a doctor because you wanted to work 9 to 5, if you became a doctor thinking this was a job that you were going to do for a couple of decades and then retire, and then that would be that because, you like to cut people open or whatever, or it's interesting, or you like science or whatever, you made a mistake. You came into the wrong place. Medicine, especially oncology, is not a job. It is a way of life. It is a religion. It is a passion. It is a vocation. It's like being a priest. And we've spoken about this, Angel. It's like we are charged with dealing with the frailties of life. And as such, there is no clock to punch. We as physicians, as leaders in our departments in oncology, need to create a culture of obsessive sensibility and sensitivity to our patients to accommodate them, even if it doesn't follow a template. Sometimes all it takes is a few reassuring words. And I can't tell you how many fights I've had with administrators saying, we can't see this patient, we have no records. I know we don't have the records, but I know that they have this. And this person is freaking out. And all I have to do is spend 5 minutes with them. I don't even need a record or a pathology report. We'll get that when we get it. I just think this person needs someone to talk to. I just think they need someone to hold their hand and tell them that there's somebody in their corner. And there is no place in a template for that 5 minutes, because that 5 minutes is indispensable. Even if it doesn't go by the book, sometimes you got to do things. And that's why I think, I'm a history buff, and, wartime history, Second World War, Normandy, D-Day, and how these soldiers had to improvise, how these were not generals and colonels that stormed these beaches. These were privates and sergeants and corporals and captains that they were landing all over the place with machine guns everywhere, bombs bursting, mines exploding, body parts flying, blood everywhere. And it's like, what are you going to do? There is no template. You just got to figure it out. And that's what I'm suggesting that we do in our clinics. And I'm not saying to have people wait 3 hours. On the contrary, I want to run my schedule like to the minute. But we need to be able to flex. We have to be able to be adaptive and to be flexible. And as I said, sometimes it might be a scared patient who's in a doctor's office who lives all the way out in Roscoe, New York, and they're an hour and 10 minutes away. And I won't see him until Monday. just have them stop by. I'll come out, I'll shake their hand. We'll have them fill out their paperwork. We'll copy their insurance card. I'll have a few words. I'll make them laugh, and then they'll leave and they'll feel great. And I didn't even have to do a consult. I just had to lay hands on that person. And I think that if you recognize this, that our work is not work, it's a calling, it's a bloody, blessed, holy endeavor to be flexible, reactive to circumstances, and commitment to service. Our survivor thrivers also have to work with us as well. I can't even tell you how many times all the nightmares I heard. Sometimes it's on you guys. Sometimes we'll call and we'll move everything around and say, okay, you come in tomorrow. And then you tell me, well, I can't come in tomorrow. Don't do that. If you make us move mountains, get your ASS to the office and make it happen. You have to work with us as well. It is a partnership. So if we all thought and did these very few and simple things, there would no longer be a hostage situation or an issue with supply and demand in oncology. There would not be this imbalance. Angel Santana, your thoughts?
I think that, going back to my original point, I think that when you look at how nowadays we have so many people that are going to see their caregiver and they're trying to do everything in their power. When I said earlier that, it's not really always the caregiver's fault, I think that we also have to take a step back and say, okay, look, we one of our things that we talk about in this program is how the system is broke. And I think that when you look at it from the perspective behind the curtain, what you hear and what you see sometimes is not always what you think. So you just put it, you answered my question. When you're moving mountains, when you're trying to do everything to accommodate a specific person, it is also the patient's part to come through. So we don't really want to point, and we haven't, but we don't want to point fingers. We just want to get resolution. And at the end of the day, it's really not about trying to figure out who dropped the ball. It's trying to figure out when we pick up the ball and run with it.
Angel, thank you for everything. Thank you for this podcast. Thank you for being you. Everybody have faith. Let it begin. 1.2 million people went viral last Monday. Please watch his episode if you want some uplifting, funny, helpful information, spiritual information. Have faith. Let it begin. Rod Freeman, I heard you're on the mend, my friend. Heal up. We can't wait to get you back into the groove. Angel and I will take you out to the Copper Barn for some more ribs and whatever it is that you want. You get it. And guess what? You only have to pay half. You don't have to pay the whole bill. You only have to pay half. Michael John Benzea, Charlotte Larson, for your belief in us. Mikey, I know you're under the weather this week. You got COVID. God bless you. Be well. Heal up, buddy. Listen to these podcasts. Give me some notes. Tell me how we're doing. Tell me how we could survive, how we could serve our survivors better. Board of directors, thanks for everything you do for us. Thank you for your sacrifice, for your commitment, your time, your talents to helping the cancer survivor thriver, because this is the pep talk part. You guys are amazing people. You've just been diagnosed with cancer and all of a sudden you can't find a doctor. Or if you found a doctor, you can't see them for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 days, even 1 minute is too much. And you don't know what to do. Well, guess what? You do now. You listen to this podcast. If any of you guys have trouble finding somebody, I don't care if you live in Wichita, Kansas. I don't care if you live in Anchorage, Alaska. I don't care if you live in Bangor, Maine. I don't care if you live in Tampa, Florida. You can always get in touch with me and Angel. And if you're having trouble with your survivorship, you give us a call and we will try to figure it out. We will talk to you. We will try to help you to the best of our ability, because you know why? Is it because we make any money doing this podcast? Zero. As a matter of fact, I lose money. I lose money by the thousands doing this podcast. But you know what? I don't care, because I love you guys. You're worthy. You're brave. You're courageous. You guys are absolute heroes. You guys are amazing, amazing people. And you know what? You got this. Nothing is going to stop you. You're going to be cured. You're going to have a great life. and you guys are going to use this experience to make your life that much better. And we will end this podcast as we end every single podcast with a prayer and a blessing, wishing you all a long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. On behalf of myself, Angel, the board of directors, God bless you. God be with you. Peace.